blood pressure meds is something that's very popular. It's obviously, if you have high blood pressure, it's a very serious condition.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people are on multiple blood
Mm-hmm.
pressure meds.
Mm-hmm.
Are those needed, or are there better, safer, more natural alternatives?
They're usually needed in the short term, where the blood pressure is discovered to be very high and you want to get it down so that it doesn't put the person at more risk than they should. So short term, yeah, there's some small place for patented blood pressure medications. What I mean by patented is that they don't occur in nature, therefore they're molecules which, see, the law says if it occurs in nature, you can't patent it. And if you can't patent it, you can't make a whole lot of money on it. So basically, the goal is to find a patentable molecule that won't kill you, that we can keep selling you forever, because we're not getting at the cause of the problem. Now let's go for, as they say in mixed up French and English, chercher la cause, or let's find what the real problem is. Okay, there are several common causes for high blood pressure, and I ask people to look for them, even if they're on the medication temporarily, and if we find them, let's do something about that cause, that cause, that cause, that cause. And usually we'll find, out of 4 or 5 common causes, we'll find 2 or 3 in any one individual with high blood pressure. So we work on those problems, and the high blood pressure slowly goes away, and they can just get off their patent medications in time. Now, the simplest one is vitamin D. What is not well publicized is that, like autoimmune disease, hypertension occurs at the least around the Earth's equator. I should say in the human population around the Earth's equator. Doesn't matter what the ethnic group is. They can be black, white, purple, pink, American Indian, whatever it is. Least hypertension if they live around the equator. As you go north towards the pole, south towards the pole, there's more and more hypertension. What does that suggest? Vitamin D, of course it suggests. Now, what nobody's telling us is that the pharmaceutical companies know this. Let me tell you how I know they know. I read a paper put out by a pharmaceutical company PhD, very bright fellow. And what he was saying is, well, there's this whole pathway of things that goes from the DNA on down to this enzyme called ACE, angiotensin converting enzyme. And we've heard of ACE blockers. That's one type of antihypertensive. And then there's another type of antihypertensive called ACE inhibitors. They inhibit the ACE from hitting the receptor over here. So what we're doing is we're stopping this ACE molecule either from being made, or we're inhibiting its action, and that's patentable. And yes, it has lots of side effects that you should call your doctor about at the bottom of the screen at the end of the commercial. But even so, it does bring down your blood pressure. So he discussed this whole thing, and then he says, this is all at the end of a set of reactions that starts up here at the DNA, and guess what regulates it, he says in his paper? Vitamin D. So if we put vitamin D in up here, well, we dam the stream up here. We don't have to dam it down there, do we? Well, we can say damming it down there, but anyway, we put in vitamin D up here. And then what he said, this fellow who worked for the pharmaceutical company, in his last paragraph is, now we have to come up with an analog, a molecule we can patent that's like vitamin D. Rather than saying, why don't we just use vitamin D? All right. So what we want to do, if we've got high blood pressure, step 1, go see your doctor. Get your vitamin D blood level measured. Is it the same as it is of people who live in the tropics, have lived there all their lives, get some sun, don't die of vitamin D overdose? Is it the same as there? Because if it isn't, you haven't got enough vitamin D in you. Yeah. Well, my background comes from what's called cultural anthropology, the study of peoples around the world living in so-called native conditions. And one of the things that doesn't occur in the tropics in native populations is hypertension, unless they're eating a Western European diet, but that's a different story, if they're on their own diet. But they're getting plenty of sun. So, very fortunately, I also work with engineers. I love working with engineers. They come in with data, they come in with statistics, they come in with, here's my cholesterol 20 years ago, here it was 15 years ago, and all that. And they follow their blood pressure carefully if they have high blood pressure at all, and they're taking it every day. So I've worked with a couple of engineers who told me that they weren't up to the tropical optimal. They had some high blood pressure. They started taking enough vitamin D to get themselves up to this tropical optimal. And just for anybody who's interested, the normal range is said to be between 30 and 100 nanograms per milliliter. Forget it. The tropical optimal is 60 to 100, folks. So I shoot for that 60 to 100, which is, again, never killed anybody in the tropics. So these engineers, they take themselves enough to get up to there, and then they bring in their chart and say, look, I got up to the tropical optimal on this date, and it took 3 to 4 months, and then my blood pressure very, very slowly came down over 3 to 4 months. So you see, it takes that long. So you've got to keep your guard up with the antihypertensive. But in the meantime, you can be bringing it down with the vitamin D, and then you can gradually get off your antihypertensive. And that's just the simplest one, because everybody's heard of vitamin D. We can get vitamin D. Nobody's patented vitamin D. And it's known how it works, right down to that. And here's another very simple one. Let's see. According to National Geographic magazine, if you go biopsy penguins and look for lead and mercury and arsenic and DDT in their penguin fat down in Antarctica, poor things have got lead in their penguin fat. And nobody's got any lead facilities down in Antarctica. It's blowing around the world just with all the industrializing, particularly in Asia and so forth. We check everyone who happens to have high blood pressure for heavy metals. Mercury, lead, arsenic, all the toxic metals. Nearly everybody has got a body burden of those things. Lead is a known cause of high blood pressure. Cadmium is an even better known cause of high blood pressure. And we'll find someone who's got high blood pressure and their toxic metals are up and where they shouldn't be and not at all in a safe range. And we'll do something called chelation, which, thank goodness, even got a good remark from the National Institutes of something or other very recently. Look at that. It cut the death rate in type 2 diabetics by 35 to 40%. Oh my goodness, doing chelation. They didn't say why, though. Well, I don't know why either, but I do know one thing chelation does. It pulls toxic metals out of the body. So the second thing to look for if you've got high blood pressure is, do you have a toxic metal burden in your body? And please don't let anybody just draw blood and tell you, oh, you haven't got any lead in your system. That's nonsense. Lead is stored in the bones. It's stored in other places. You have to send in via IV a chelating agent. It's safe. One of the chelating agents is used as a food preservative. It's that safe. And once that's in there, collect all the urine for 6 hours, because what these chelating agents do is they grab the toxic metals wherever they are in the body. They come out in the urine, and your doctors can tell you, look at what was stored away in your system. So you never do it with a basic blood test. You've got to do the chelation test. Do enough chelation to bring things down to normal, and the blood pressure comes right down with it, too. Now, most everybody that I've run into who has high blood pressure has those two basic problems. They live north of the tropics. They have lower than optimal vitamin D. And secondly, they've been on the planet since the Industrial Revolution started. And here comes all this lead and mercury and toxic stuff. And we work on those two things, and it pulls down the blood pressure. Okay, sorry, but here comes the third one. According to a lot of statistics, 1/3 the population of North America has the genetic predisposition to type 2 diabetes. Now, before we ever get type 2 diabetes, you've heard of something called metabolic syndrome, sometimes it's called, and sometimes it's called insulin resistance. And as a lot of folks know by now, when we have type 2 diabetes, we don't have not enough insulin. That's type 1 diabetes. Type 2, we've actually got an abundance of insulin. It's going high, but our bodies are developing this thing called insulin resistance. And so they resist the activity of insulin, but insulin is so crucial for getting the sugars into the cells that the body makes more insulin, more resistance, more insulin, more resistance, more insulin, and it goes up and up and up till finally that insulin simply can't work as good as it should, and now a person's got type 2 diabetes. That process takes 30 to 40 years for metabolic syndrome. We've seen it in kids, teenagers, to turn into outright type 2 diabetes. One of the things that ever-increasing insulin signal does, folks, is to drive up the blood pressure. So, a lot of people come in. I'm on this statin over here for my cholesterol. I'm on this antihypertensive over here for my high blood pressure. And I'll say, were you checked for pre-type 2 diabetes? Were you checked for insulin resistance? No, what's that? Well, excuse me, but if you've got high cholesterol, it turns out that high insulin stimulates the enzyme in everybody's liver that makes cholesterol, and high insulin stimulates the blood pressure to go up. So you're almost a lock if you've got high blood pressure and high cholesterol to be a type 2 diabetic unless you do something about it. It's not that hard. Diet and exercise are the two main things. All right? So we'll do this test called an insulin resistance test for people who have any chance of being pre-type 2 diabetic. 100% of everybody who comes in who says, I have a type 2 diabetic family, type 2 diabetic in my family, and I'm getting high blood pressure, 100% of them, we give them the insulin resistance test. And about 95% of them, they're on their way to type 2 diabetes. So what do? Give them an antihypertensive? Now what does that do to keep you from getting type 2 diabetes? Not a thing. It just keeps the blood pressure down. But if they go onto a diet, and the best diet is the paleo diet, and more folks are noticing that. They go onto a paleo diet, they do the right kind of exercise, which is called interval training, and then there's a few basic supplements that many of the very smart doctors have wrapped into multiples for people with blood sugar. They have the chromium and the biotin and all the good stuff in extra quantities in there, you see. So you go onto the diet, you go onto the exercise, you use this basic multiple that's made up for people with blood sugar troubles, and you bring in a botanical called berberine. Oh, that one has been studied intensively. It does so many things, and it does them very rapidly to get that insulin signal under control. So, as the insulin signal comes down, the blood pressure comes down, the cholesterol comes down, and you ain't going to get type 2 diabetes either. What could be better? So, there's a third thing we can do. While we're working on that, if your blood pressure is still that high that you need that antihypertensive, okay. But now let's look at a couple of other things. Let's look at the medications they use for high blood pressure. One of the more famous ones is called calcium channel blockers, right?
Mm-hmm.
If the calcium channel blocker worked on your body, do you know what that means? It means you didn't have enough magnesium.
Mm-hmm.
Because magnesium is nature's calcium channel blocker. Now, some very smart scientists, I'll shut up on this topic in a moment, but some very smart scientists with electron microscopes examined what do calcium channel blockers do. It turns out that there's very little calcium inside of cells. Most of it's outside the cell. And there's these things called calcium channels that allow the calcium to come through. But when they do, the blood vessel muscle wall can't relax as well because the calcium is a contractile force and the magnesium is a relaxing force. All right, so these channels, these people with electron microscopes discovered that sitting in the inside of each one of them, inside the cell, is a magnesium ion, and it blocks the calcium from coming through. Okay? All right. What do calcium channel blockers do? They studied with the electron microscope. The calcium channel blockers literally turned those channels into spaghetti so that nothing could get through. They actually twisted and deformed a normal formation in the cell membrane so nothing could get through. Now, excuse me, nature wants that calcium to get through when it's needed. It parks this magnesium molecule in the way, and when it's needed, the magnesium molecule somehow knows to get the heck out of the way, and here comes a little calcium, and the magnesium gets back in there, but the channel is still intact. So it can work the way nature intended it to. All right, so if a calcium channel blocker worked, maybe that person didn't have enough magnesium to block their calcium channels adequately. So what do? Well, we can certainly have people take magnesium. Up to a certain amount, 300-400 milligrams a day, doesn't bother too many people. But past that, it starts behaving more and more like milk with magnesia. Mm-hmm. You know what Mom gave that to us for. Mm-hmm. So, very fortunately, some of the more innovative companies out there have come up with magnesium preparations, and there's 3 or 4 different competing companies, where in a half teaspoon of the stuff, my goodness, there's 1,500, 2,000 milligrams of magnesium. You rub in a quarter teaspoon a day. I know one gentleman who unfortunately lost both of his kidneys to kidney cancer. His blood pressure's up here. His doctor can't believe that he's taking no antihypertensive medications because all he does is to rub in a half teaspoon of this magnesium stuff every day. This is nephrologist doctor, that is. And his blood magnesium is twice normal, which, by the way, never hurt anybody unless it slows their pulse. And his blood pressure is under perfect control, thank you. The magnesium keeps those blood vessels dilated as they can. So another thing we'll do is look at magnesium. Is that going to help this person any? What are their magnesium levels? Well, like I said, there's 4 or 5 things. There's 2 or 3 more I can tell you about. Those are some of the major ones. If we look for the causes for that high blood pressure and work on every one of the causes that person has, because, of course, there's no relationship known between lack of vitamin D and toxic metal exposure. You know, there's independent causes. We work on every one of them. our odds of getting a person's, I'll take that back, that person's odds of getting their own blood pressure back to normal, because that's the person who ultimately has to be responsible as the person with the problem, no question. And the best a doctor can do is coach and hope that they take the coaching and see if it works. But if a person works on it, they can almost always get their blood pressure down to normal and be off all antihypertensives within 6 months to 12 months. And since we've gotten at the causes, that person is going to be that much healthier for the long run. Because look at, what if they were low on vitamin D? They're much more open to dying of a variety of things, breast cancer, prostate cancer, than if they had enough vitamin D. So we've not only helped the one problem, we've helped several other things. And same thing with a person's blood pressure is up because of insulin resistance. There's two ways of going about it. Take that patent medicine or don't get type 2 diabetes. Okay?